Arajin is a weak, bullied loser who moves to a new school hoping to bag his crush. However, everything changes when his crush betrays him, so he makes a deal with a powerful genie who gives him super strength so he can crack everyone and rizz up baddies. It all begins on a certain day when Arajin is walking through the halls of his new school with a teacher who explains to him that two rival gangs called Minato-ke and Sigma are competing against each other for the top spot. However, Arajin isn't interested in their gang wars, so he asks the teacher if there are any baddies in class. The teacher assures him that there are cuties, but once he enters class, he sees the entire background cast of Tokyo Revengers staring at him with threatening eyes, causing him to sweat profusely. However, amongst the crowd of hoodlums, he spots a girl as beautiful as Margot Robbie, and this makes him so excited that he punches the air in celebration. Like a smooth criminal, he slithers into the seat beside her, and she shockingly introduces herself to him as Ma Horo with a warm smile, which sends Cupid's missile directly through his heart. His mind immediately drifts into Delulu land as he starts imagining a dream wedding between the two of them, but he has no idea that two backbenchers are watching him closely. Once the closing bell rings, Mahoro gives Arajin the shock of his life by asking to walk home with him, and he nods like a mentally deranged dog in response, so she promises to wait for him at the gate. After she leaves, Arajin starts jumping in happiness, thinking he's finally about to bag a 10 out of 10. But suddenly, one of the thugs who is spying on him, named Zabu, trips him and asks where he's going. Arajin tries to avoid him, but the other backbencher, Saki, blocks his path, and the two of them start pressuring him to have fun with them. However, Arajin distracts them by lying that Homelander has crashed into the building, and this allows him to run away from class. As the bullies chase after him, Arajin goes full turbo because he doesn't want anything to do with them, but suddenly, he bumps into their comrade, who has the build of Dwayne Johnson. Arajin starts freaking out, thinking he's about to get squashed, but the guy suddenly starts acting friendly with him and introduces himself as Matakara. Hearing this, Arajin remembers that they're old friends who used to train together, hoping to become powerful entities called Honky People, but when Matakara invites him to join their club activities, he coldly rejects the offer and walks away. As he runs downstairs, Arajin wonders why the town is giving him bad luck by making him meet Matakara, whom he's been trying to avoid all this time, but he soon experiences a greater stroke of bad luck in the yard, as he sees that his glorious queen has left him behind. The next day, Arajin picks a spot on the school roof to have lunch, but Mahoro makes a surprise entrance above him. As they eat together, Mahoro decides to become friends with Arajin, and when she calls him by his first name, his brain launches into outer space. However, she shocks him even further by asking to hang out with him that Saturday, but before he can respond, Matakara calls him from the ground below. Saki and Zabu wonder why he's so obsessed with a loser, so Matakara explains that he really admires Arajin because he's strong and brave, but they still don't buy it. After school, they take Arajin to an arcade, where Zabu apologizes for earlier and asks to be friends with him. Suddenly, a group of gangsters cosplaying the Espada approach Arajin and start bullying him for entering their turf. After forcing him out of his uniform, the bullies chase him away, and Zabu and Saki laugh because they were the ones who set it up to see if he's truly strong, which he failed. Out of desperation, Arajin runs into a shrine, but the men in white break inside, so he picks up a strange gun from the floor and points it at them. However, the gangsters think he's only bluffing, so they approach him, but he suddenly pulls the trigger, causing a pink bullet to ricochet around the room and knock him on the head. Hours later, Arajin wakes up and notices that a piece of metal is now attached to his head. Once he twists it, a pink spirit with the body shape of Brock Lesnar appears and introduces himself as Senya, a honky person, and Arajin is surprised that honky people from the legends actually exist. Senya then asks him to wish for anything he wants in the world, but Bro proves to be just as down bad as Annie Ender subscribers by wishing to crack some baddies. Being a real bro, Senya understands where he's coming from, so he offers to merge with him, but Arajin aggressively refuses because he doesn't swing that way. The next day, Arajin enjoys some ice cream with Mahoro on a bench, but Senya keeps pestering Arajin, so he yells at him to shut up, which confuses Mahoro because can't see Senya. Shortly after, Mahoro tells Arajin that she's glad he moved into their school, and Senya motivates him to make his move, so he boldly stands up to give her the gift he got her. However, all his aura points go down the drain when his bowels start roaring in public, forcing him to rush to the nearest public White House. After dropping his load, Arajin feels depressed that his nervous dumps have cost him his ultimate cracking opportunity. But when he returns to Mahoro, she welcomes him with a smile. This gives him the motivation he needs to hand her the gift, but when he tries to confess his feelings to her, some gangsters suddenly surround them in mini carts. Just then, a Hisoka clone with green hair arrives and introduces himself as the head of the Siguma squad, Marieto, but Arajin doesn't want anything to do with him, so he grabs Mahoro's hand while trying to walk away. However, Mahoro suddenly leans into him and asks him to fight for her, causing his 2 brain cells to launch out of his skull. Seeing this, Marito threatens to skin him alive for putting his hands on his little sister, and Arajin is stunned that Mahoro is related to such a weirdo. Marito starts kicking Arajin around while Mahoro simps for him, and Senya sees this, but he concludes that Arajin is worthless and tries to leave. However, Arajin suddenly starts showing resolve, so Senya cheerfully asks what he wishes for. With all the boldness in the world, Arajin declares that his wish is to get laid, so Senya finally fuses with his body, allowing him to block Marito's kick. As Arajin charges in, his arms suddenly become as ripped as the Hulk's, and he delivers a powerful punch, which sends Marito flying. Madakara watches this godly feat like a Netflix live-action movie, and as all the Siguma members rush to check on Marito, he freezes in shock, as he realizes that Arajin's punch looked exactly like a honky. Senya starts yelling at Arajin for making a pathetic wish, and the 2 idiots start bickering, but Marito suddenly returns to his feet and launches Arajin into the river with a kick. Seeing this, Madakara bumps into one of his ops named Ryu while desperately running ahead, and jumps into the river to save him. As the cops arrive, all the gangsters in the area run away, but Marito still has the mark from Arajin's punch on his abs, so he decides that he'll recruit Arajin to Siguma. Hours later, Arajin wakes up from a nightmare and sees Madakara by his bedside, but his body is still drowning in pain from the fight with Marieto. Madakara explains to Arajin that he's still living at the bathhouse run by his relatives, and he shows Arajin a best friend stone he gave him when they were younger, while reminiscing about old times. However, Arajin puts his trousers back on and starts walking away, so Madakara stops him by asking if the reason he's avoiding him is that he's not strong enough, but Arajin claims it's because he doesn't remember much from their past. As he walks away, Senya appears in Pokemon form and drags Arajin to a spot in town where they meet Zabu. As Zabu pesters Arajin with questions, he accidentally taps the metal plate on his head, causing Senya to appear and scare him off. Later that day, Arajin is finally getting a bath, and he remembers the moment Senya fused with him, which made him feel like he was someone else. When he asks Senya who he is, Senya geeks out like Gear 5 Luffy while introducing himself as a true honky person. Arajin is bamboozled since honky people are meant to be legends, but Senya changes the subject by bringing up the punch he gave Marieto and explaining that he could only do it once because they're partially merged. This confuses Arajin even more, so Senya holds his shoulders while explaining that Arajin won't get stronger unless they become one in body and soul. Meanwhile, Mahoro is begging her Oni-chan to give her a taste of his white sauce when Ryu suddenly arrives with some first-year thugs and asks to speak with Marieto. Marito's second-in-command, Aota, tries to chase the first years away, but Marito stops him and hands Ryu the Taco Bell special he was eating. Ryu asks Marito if he plans on recruiting someone affiliated with Minato Kai, but Marito nonchalantly eats a kebab while telling him that he'll recruit Madakara as well because he's tough. This makes Ryu so angry that he tosses the sandwich away, and Marieto starts laughing, so Ryu boldly tells him that he'll be the one to succeed him. As Arajin walks to school, all the gangsters stare at him in shock because of his performance against Marieto, and they start plotting to fight him, so Senya seizes the opportunity to tease him. He yells at Senya to shut up, but the thugs think he's talking to them, so they all jump away. Suddenly, Marito arrives and starts running towards Arajin, so Arajin runs away to protect his dump hole. Meanwhile, Zabu tells Madakara not to hang out with Arajin anymore because he thinks Arajin is carrying a special grade cursed spirit with him, but Madakara doesn't understand him, so Saki explains that Zabu can see things. Madakara then informs them that he's planning to ask Arajin to join the Minato Kai, and Zabu claims that their boss, Ken, would never allow that gooner in, but Madakara reveals that Ken himself wants to meet him. Shortly after, Madakara walks through the hallway at school when he runs into Marieto, who tells him that he plans to recruit Arajin into Siguma while riding a goofy cart. Meanwhile, Arajin's class is rowdy, as all the thugs are talking about their body counts and love hotels, but Senya starts teasing Arajin again, so Arajin yells at him to shut up, causing the entire class to shut their traps. As Arajin bickers with Senya, he suddenly hears Marieta's voice calling him, so he jumps out the window. A while later, Arajin meets Mahoro on the roof and tries to start small talk with her, but she pretends not to see him. Arajin apologizes for losing to her brother the previous day and promises her that he'll face him one more time to earn his respect, but Mahoro coldly threatens to cut off his man jewels if he ever hurts her brother again and destroys the gift he gave her. Later that day, Mahoro returns home and sees Maharito oozing with Sigma energy as he sleeps, so she approaches him to get a taste of his popsicle, but ends up getting a knuckle sandwich instead as Marieto is dreaming about having a rematch with Arajin. This makes her declare that she'll unalive Arajin. Later that evening, Matakara writes to his brother, informing him that Arajin has transferred to Ichizu High, and he wants to start training with him again to become honky people. The next day, Arajin is in class, still drowning in misery because of Mahoro's harsh rejection, and Matakara arrives to recruit him into Minato Kai. However, Ryu storms in with his gang, and Zabu tries to confront him, but Ryu takes him out with a Tanjiro special. When Matakara asks Ryu what he wants, he says he has business with Arajin, but Matakara says he has to go through him first. The two Gigachads head to the yard for their duel, and all the gangsters gather around them, but Arajin gets so nervous that he runs to the bathroom again. Matakara launches some Street Fighter combos at Ryu, but Ryu dodges easily, and they struggle with each other for several minutes before Matakara lands an axe kick on Ryu's head. However, the attack does 0 damage to Ryu, who attempts one of his signature headbutts, but Matakara Uno reverses it with a headbutt of his own, which knocks Ryu out. However, Arajin sees that Matakara is about to pass out, so he catches him and takes him to another spot in the yard, where he complements his battle skills. Matakara then invites him to join the Minato Kai so they can become honky people together, but Arajin coldly rejects, so he sways him by promising to introduce him to Ken, who is Marieto's rival. Hours later, Matakara takes Arajin to meet Ken, and Arajin challenges him to a duel because he believes that beating Marieto's rival would make Mahoro fall in love with him. Once the duel begins, Arajin fuses with Senya once again and delivers a Detroit smash that sends Ken flying into the wall, leaving everyone shocked. However, Ken returns to his feet and sends Arajin flying through the roof with a powerful jab. The next day in class, Arajin is chilling in class when Marieto suddenly crashes in through the window and cuddles him while asking him to join their team. Arajin tries to refuse, but he sees Mahoro giving him a heart signal of approval, so the hopeless simp passionately tells Marieto that he's joining Sigma. Just then, Matakara arrives to invite Arajin for another meeting with Ken, but Marieto delivers the news that he's already taken. As Marieto brags about securing the Golden Virgin, Zabu calls Arajin a two-timing hoe, and Matakara desperately tries to remind Arajin of their goal to become honky people together. But Marito makes it clear that he's now a Sigma boy and walks away with Arajin, leaving Matakara in shambles. Meanwhile, the leader of the White Gang secretly plots to make Ken and Marito settle their differences on the battlefield, but his subordinates wonder if he's awakened a JoJo stan since he's talking to thin air. At the Sigma base, Tatsudo tells Arajin that it's almost time for the Sigma squad to take the top, and this makes Senya jump around in excitement, but Arajin is depressed because he has no interest in fights and only joined to get a taste of Mahoro's cheeks. Just then, Marieto arrives and asks Arajin to join him on a stroll, so he gleefully agrees. As they walk through the street, Marito gets a call from someone, and afterwards, he informs Arajin that they're going to a pleasure house for his welcoming party, which excites him. On the way there, they run into several of the White Gang members beating up a random student for money, so Marito sends one of them flying with a Liu Kang kick. Arajin recognizes the two other white uniformed blokes as the same dudes that chased him around town, and Ryu asks what members of the Nitro Boys are doing in that area, so Tatsudo explains that a guy named Shindo, who was exiled from Minato, just took over as their head. Suddenly, the Nitro Boys pull out some blades and explain that they have to cut them down, or else their emperor would destroy them, but Marito knocks them both down with powerful kicks and hands their victim back his wallet before walking off. Meanwhile, Mahoro is walking home from school, but Matakara blocks her path and asks her if she's the one who hit Arajin into Sigma, but she ignores him and moves ahead. However, Matakara grabs her hand and says he won't let go until she talks to him, but she suddenly activates a bootleg Echo attack, which stuns him into letting her go. Shortly after, Marito introduces Arajin to the entire Sigma squad and informs them that he has a punch that's more powerful than Saitama's, and this makes them interested in him. He then announces that it's time to start their favorite festival game, which is a special rock-paper-scissors game called Look the Other Way, and the winner will get a 1-year supply of KFC chicken, but the thugs are underwhelmed by the reward. Marito picks Arajin as his partner and tells them all to partner up with the person beside them, but once the game begins, Aota sends his partner flying with a brutal punch, making Arajin freak out. As Arajin stares in shock, Marito asks if he now understands the rules, and Bro says he does, even though his tiny brain is about to collapse from fear. Hearing this, Marito announces the start of the next round, and Ryu headbutts his partner into next week, and the other things partake in the brutality as well, leaving Arajin paralyzed in fear and regret. After several rounds, Marito asks Arajin to give the game a try, and he immediately tries to refuse, but Marito tells him it's the best opportunity to show off his special punch. As Arajin prepares to begin the game, Marito promises to meet him in the final round, and this makes him so terrified that he begs Senya to merge with him quickly. However, instead of fulfilling his request, Senya suddenly turns into a TikTok motivational speaker, as he claims that Arajin won't be satisfied with winning with his help. As Arajin argues with him, Ryu steps up to challenge him, but Aota cuts the line and tells him that he's going first. Aota then introduces himself to Arajin, and everyone around claims that Arajin is unlucky because he's about to face the Jackie Chan of their team, who is the leader of the special attack unit. Arajin himself realizes that he's about to get viciously slimed, so he begs Senya to help him, and Senya finally agrees, so Tatsudo steps up to be the referee. Once the match begins, Arajin loses, and when it's time to take his punishment, he begs Senya to possess him again. However, as Aota throws a punch, Senya holds his face in place, and Aota's fist breaks on impact with Arajin's face. This shocks everyone around because they know Aota's punch is like getting hit in the face with Thor's hammer, and Tatsudo declares Arajin the winner, so Aota walks away in shame. However, things go from bad to worse because Arajin's next opponent is the headbutting demon, Ryu, and Arajin starts shivering in fear because he knows his skull can't handle any more brutal hits. Fortunately, when the semifinal round begins, Arajin actually manages to win the draw, and he decides to throw a light punch so he'd lose, but ends up getting distracted by some baddies passing by, so the punch ends up being a feather tap. However, Tatsudo reveals that he's just used one of the secret martial arts techniques from the Dragon Warrior's archives and declares him the winner. Seeing this, Marito joyously leaps down to face him in the final round, and Senya starts teasing Arajin again, so he yells at him to shut up. However, since Marito can't see the pink doofus, he assumes that Arajin is insulting him and goes into beast mode. Arajin concludes that his skull is about to get cracked like an egg, but Senya says some Andrew Tate quotes to motivate him, and Marito reveals that the reason he likes Arajin is that he could feel his honky when he punched him. Once the game begins, Arajin's bowels give up on him again, so he rushes to the bathroom to ease himself, only to see Aota brutally injured on the ground. As everyone checks on Aota, Tatsudo shows them an armband of Minato K, which was found at the scene of the crime, and this gets Marito enraged. Shortly after, Tatsudo explains to Marito that Aota and Marito have been besties since their early years, and the only person who can defeat Aota is Ken, but they know that Ken wouldn't pull shady stuff like that. When Arajin returns to his family restaurant, he sees Mahoro and tells her that he wants to quit Sigma, but she smacks him in the face and begs him to stay so that he'll defeat her brother. Later that evening, the simp starts shadowboxing to fulfill his glorious queen's request, and Senya also teaches him some other training techniques as well. Meanwhile, Ryu and Tatsudo run into some Minato Kai members on the street, so Ryu beats them and swears to get revenge for Aota as he walks away. However, some Nitro boys show up and beat the Minato Kai members up even more with weapons. The next day, Arajin is training with Matakara during sports, but some Minato Kai members call Matakara to tell him that their members have been brutally beaten up by Sigma members. Meanwhile, Marito sees some other Sigma members injured on the ground with evidence pointing to Minato Kai, so he storms into their base and challenges Ken to a fight. As Ken walks into the room, Marito tries to nail him with a kick, but Matakara blocks with a kick of his own. However, Marito smiles and sends Matakara flying with a spinning back kick, so Zabu rushes to check on him. When Matakara asks for the reason for their attack, the hothead, Ryu, starts hurling insults at him, So, Zabu insults him back while bringing up how their members were attacked by Sigma members. This leads to a heated argument between the two, but Ryu ends it with his vibranium skull headbutt, and Saki rushes in to retaliate, but Madakara stops him and asks them to calm down. However, Ryu throws a Minato Kai band on the ground while explaining that it was lying next to Auda, but Madakara argues that it isn't the work of the Minato Kai since they would never do something so cowardly. So Marito tells them to provide the real culprits the next day or go into a full war with Sigma. He then promises Ken that they'd settle things this time before leaving with his squad. A while later, Arajin enters the Sigma base, but everyone stares at him angrily like he's just taken a dump on their favorite jeans, so Tatsudo drags him away and explains that they're about to go to war with Minato Kai. Arajin doesn't want to get involved in such a war, but Tatsudo starts losing his mind because a war between Minato Kai and Sigma is bound to be more disastrous and bloody than the Shibuya incident. However, this excites the pink battle junkie, who starts celebrating the upcoming war until Arajin kicks him away and asks Tatsudo how Marieto is handling everything. Tatsudo explains that he's focused on settling his beef with Ken, and Arajin is stunned that the two leaders are about to have a showdown bigger than John Cena versus The Rock. Hours later, Madakara and his two pals are chilling in his home, and Zabu and Saki are speaking cheerfully in anticipation of the war. But Madakara isn't happy about it at all because Minato Kai has always been about pursuing true strength through meaningful man-to-man fights. Saki then asks him about the Minato Kai branded jacket hanging in his room, and he says it belongs to his brother, Mitsukuni. Some years ago, Madakara was crying miserably, but Mitsukuni reminded him that a honky person would never run away and placed his jacket over him while telling him to keep working hard to become a honky person. Now, in the present, Madakara tells his friends that he wants to keep his promise to his brother and to the Minato Kai he cares so deeply about. So Zabu points out that everyone in the club deeply respects Mitsukuni, since he was their previous leader. Madakara then grabs the gift stone he got from Arajin and tells them he has something to do as he runs away. After he leaves, Saki points out that Zabu hasn't been wearing his jacket recently and asks where his armband is, but Zabu suspiciously replies that some crows fled away with it. However, Saki has fewer brain cells than an earthworm, so he starts crashing out at the crows outside. Sometime earlier, Zabu was bored while reading the latest chapter of One Piece, but suddenly, the leader of the Nitro Boys arrived and introduced himself as Shindo. Zabu immediately rage-baited him by asking why he's acting like a tough guy after getting booted from Minato Kai half a year ago, but Shindo stretched out his hand while offering to be friends with him. As Zabu shoved his hand away, Shindo suddenly dragged him forward with a whip and delivered a vicious knee strike directly to his gut. Before he could even process what was going on, Shindo piled up the offense with brutal whip slashes before axe-kicking him hard on the ground. Shindo then grabbed his armband and called him a bigger fraud than Megume for losing to someone he rage-baited. In the present, Zabu feels ashamed about the whole thing, so he swears that he'll never tell anyone. Meanwhile, Arajin is walking by the street, telling Senya that there's no need to continue training since Marito and Ken are going to fight each other. This confuses Senya, so he narrates his goofy fantasy where Marito wins and officially hands over ownership of Sigma, as well as his sister's cheeks, to Arajin. He also narrates another fantasy where Marito loses and hands over the Sigma gang to him before dying, allowing him to finally crack Mahoro. When Arajin returns to his family restaurant, his mom informs him that Madakara has arrived to see him. Shortly after, they arrive in Arajin's room, where Madakara asks Arajin if he plans to fight in the war the next day, but Arajin says it depends on the situation. Hearing this, Madakara asks him to stop Marieto because he's sure he'd be able to convince him, but Arajin says it doesn't concern him. So Madakara explains that he has a bad feeling because his guys would never harm someone like that. Madakara then brings up a day in their past where they shared some gifts and promised to become honky people, and he claims that he still wants to become a honky person with him, but Arajin pushes him away, saying that it's ancient history. The next morning, Arajin meets Mahoro on the roof and frame Moggs while talking about how he plans to take over Sigma, but Mahoro ignores him. Just then, Madakara arrives and asks Mahoro to talk with him about Marieto, so she leaves with him to a private spot. There, Madakara asks her to convince Marieto to stop the war, but she gets ticked off and tries to leave, so he stops her by pointing out that they could end up unaliving each other. Mahoro sadly admits that Marieto won't listen to what she says, so he asks her to persuade Arajin to convince him. She refuses and tries to leave, but he holds her back again, so she tries to use her sonic scream powers. However, he covers her mouth and tells her that he wants to fulfill his promise to his big brother, and this makes her finally calm down, since she can relate. Shortly afterwards, Mahoro tells Arajin to convince her brother to stop the war, and he agrees like a loyal dog, but when he meets Marieto to do it, the boss's face makes him tremble in fear. Meanwhile, the Minato Kai members are preparing for the upcoming war, and Madakara tries to talk Ken out of it, but Ken tells him that it's time to settle things. At the same time, Arajin is goofing off on the street when he runs into Shindo, who ragebaits him into charging in for a punch. At the Minato Ki base, Zabu tells Madakara about how Shindo used him to set the whole thing up, so Madakara decides to talk with Shindo. At the same time, Shindo whips Arajin away, so Arajin merges with Senya and tanks all of his whip strikes before sending him flying with a super punch. However, Shindo suddenly gets back up, and Senya is shocked to see that he's merged with an honky person named Ichiya. A while later, the Nitro Boys are at their base, working hard to make weapons so that Shindo doesn't toss them in prison, but suddenly, Madakara arrives and asks to talk to Shindo. Seeing that he's a Minato Kai member, one of the Nitro Boys charges at him with a metal pipe, but Madakara sends him flying with a kick. Just then, Shindo arrives and calls Arajin, who rushes in, wearing just trunks and a weird pink crown on his head, like a loyal dog, and this shocks Madakara. When Madakara asks what he's doing, Arajin looks away while saying he's playing King's orders, and Shindo asks Arajin if they're friends, but he says it's nothing like that. Arajin then asks Madakara what he's doing there, and Madakara explains to him that the war between Siguma and Minato Kai is all a trap that Shindo set, but Shindo lies that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Hearing this, Madakara moves in to pound the truth out of him, and Arajin tries to stop him, but he pushes Arajin aside, and Shindo pulls out his whip to prepare for their battle. As Shindo spams whip strikes, Madakara dodges, but when he tries to kick Shindo, the Freak King blocks with his whip and wraps it around Madakara's neck before pulling him closer. With his knees powered up by Ichiya, Shindo delivers a brutal knee strike to Madakara, which launches him to the ground and then starts insulting him for being weak trash, despite being Minato Kai's number 2. Seeing this, Senya is now certain that Ichiya has merged with Shindo. As the Minato Kai members march through the streets, Zabu calls Madakara worriedly, but Madakara doesn't answer because he's currently tied up and gagged at the Nitro Boys base. Suddenly, Arajin enters his prison room and takes off the tape on his mouth, and Madakara asks him why he's dressed up in Johnny Sin's signature outfit, so Arajin explains what happened. Back when Shindo got up after being honky-punched, he invited Arajin to attack him again, so Arajin charged in with another powered-up fist, but Shindo wrapped up his arm and told him it's okay that he's a virgin since they all start that way. Afterwards, he took Arajin to the Nitro Boys headquarters, where Arajin was given the kind of special service that you nerds fantasize about in your Gunner dreams. After hearing this, Madakara is stunned at Bro's shamelessness, but Arajin justifies his actions by saying he has his reasons for doing things that way, and he tells Madakara to give up because gang fights happen all the time. However, Madakara argues that this fight isn't a real one, because it's rigged, but Arajin arrogantly claims that it's stupid, so Madakara asks why he's suddenly acting like a wimp when he used to be more like a honky person. Arajin says he doesn't have any interest in honky people, but suddenly, Shindo arrives and tells Arajin to follow him since everyone else is waiting for him. As Arajin leaves the room, Madakara tells him that he's always believed in him and tries several times to call out to him, but Arajin ignores him while following Shindo. When they were still midgets, some things saw them playing superheroes and mocked them for it, so the wannabe Superman, Madakara, charged in to attack them, only to get brutally beaten while the cowardly idiot, Arajin, watched from behind a tree. The thugs then decided that he's next on the chopping block, so the loser ran away with his shrimp-sized tail between his legs. In the present, Arajin feels disgusted that Madakara made him remember that incident. Elsewhere, the Minato K army marches forward to face the Siguma gang, and Mahoro watches from a hiding spot, plotting to give her brother a sloppy toppy with no hands after he defeats Ken, but she starts crashing out when she realizes that Arajin and Madakara aren't there yet. Meanwhile, Shindo takes Arajin to a disco room, where he makes all the Nitro Boys hurl insults at the Siguma squad before asking Arajin to dump them and join his gang. The dimwit immediately starts folding because of all the baddies they have in stock for him, but Shindo suddenly does some Fortnite emotes while saying their motto. Shindo then announces that the war between Saguma and Minato Kai is about to begin and threatens his crew, saying he'd unalive them if they don't destroy both teams. So they start doing Wakandan war chants in anticipation. When Arajin asks where they're going, Shindo explains, while breaking the disco ball, that the plan is to march in and finish off both the Saguma squad and the Minato Kai after they've destroyed each other, and Senya reminds him that it's what Madakara said. As Arajin walks through the hallway, Madakara calls out to him, but he doesn't answer, so Madakara gets depressed as he realizes that Arawimp has given up on becoming a honky person. He suddenly trips and falls on the ground, and when he sees the best friend stone Arajin gave him, he remembers Arajin promising to become honky people with him, which makes him realize that Arajin would never give up on that dream. Meanwhile, Zabu tries to call Madakara again, but he doesn't answer, so he rushes away to find him. After he leaves, Marito takes off his shirt to prepare for his duel with Ken, and Mahoro can't help but take a million pictures of her Ani-chan's chiseled abs. While walking the streets, Shindo asks Arajin about Madakara's obsession with becoming honky people, so he explains that it's a dumb promise they made when they were younger. When Shindo asks if he's visited the honky shrine recently, Senya tells Arajin to lie that he hasn't, so he does just that, but Shindo suddenly offers him the spot of right-hand man. Arajin doesn't want the stress, but Shindo promises to make the Nitro girls recreate Brazzers scenes with him, so he actually starts to fold until he remembers his glorious queen, which makes him geek out over her. Shindo suddenly starts monologuing about crushing Ken, and when Arajin asks why, he narrates the story of how he joined the Minato K and became one of the strongest, until he one day tried to use a weapon during a duel, which led to him being kicked out of the gang by Ken. In the present, Zabu breaks into the Nitro Boys' headquarters and beats up the guards before freeing Madakara. Meanwhile, at the Coliseum, the Nitro Boys prepare for battle, but Arajin's bowels go into a frenzy again, so he tries to run to the bathroom. However, Shindo stops him and starts yapping about the Netflix and chill positions he plans to put Mahoro in, and this triggers Arajin so much that he forces Senya to fuse with him and sends the creep flying with a punch. Afterwards, he runs to the bathroom, but Shindo smiles because he now has confirmation that Senya is working with Arajin. Meanwhile, the armies of Saguma and Minato Kai are preparing to begin their war when Madakara and Zabu show up and explain to them that it's all a setup by Shindo. Suddenly, Arajin rushes in, being chased by the army of Nitro Boys, and Madakara asks the bosses to stop the fight, but Marito says it doesn't matter anymore and charges at Ken to begin their duel. Arajin runs quickly like a bootleg Flash, but he eventually trips on a rock and falls, only to realize that no one is chasing him anymore. When he looks behind, he sees that the Nitro Boys have all stood in a battle formation, and in front of him, the members of Saguma and Minato Kai are gathered to have their war. Meanwhile, Marito charges in with a roundhouse kick, but Ken blocks with a powerful palm strike, and the impact causes pain to both men. Down below, the members of both squads start throwing hands, and Arajin is terrified that World War III is really happening in front of him, but the goofy spirit celebrates around him. Marito charges in again with another kick, and this time, the kick lands, but Ken lands a blow on his face at the same time. As the two Gigachads fight, Aota watches from the sidelines, and he remembers how it all began. Years ago, Marito and Ken were known as the God Kings because they dominated every school in Honky City, and every gangster feared them. Back then, Aota asked Marito which gang he intended to join between Minato Kai and the Iki Nation, but Marito said he was bored with both of them. As Marito walked ahead, some pea-brained crackheads decided to Aota, and Aota sent their leader flying with a single punch, but he was still bothered because Marieto seemed bummed out ever since they became the top dogs, and he wondered if there was something that could reignite his flame. Suddenly, one of the punks begged Aota to join the Iki Union, but this confused them, so he dragged them to an area where the leader of the Iki Union, Shiba, challenged Ken to a duel and declared that he'd take him down. However, as he charged in for an attack, Ken sent him flying into next month with a brutal palm strike. As the Minato Kai members celebrated, Marito suddenly rushed in and tried to land a kung fu kick on Ken, but Ken blocked easily, so he attempted another brutal kick, which was blocked as well. Ken then threw Marito away, and his strength excited the battle freak so much that he begged for round 2, but Ken ignored him and walked away. A while later, two Kiki Union punks begged Marieto to become the new leader of the Iki Union because they were desperate to defeat him, and he only fought against people with strong convictions, but Marito still wasn't interested. Hours later, Auda stormed into the Minato Ki base and told Ken that he had taken over as the leader of the Iki Union before challenging him to a fight. As Marito walked home that day, he saw some gangsters talking about how Auda and Ken are having a UFC match on the block, and this surprised him. On the battlefield, Auda threw his most powerful punch at Ken, but the Japanese King Kong tanked it with zero difficulty and sent him flying with a punch of his own. As Auda lay in pain on the ground, Marito rushed in to check on him, and he ripped off All Might by telling him it's his turn now. Hearing this, Marito lightly scolded Auda for acting as a human sacrifice to set up their duel, but he said conviction had nothing to do with it because what he really wanted was excitement. Marito then gleefully charged in with an axe kick, which was immediately blocked by Ken's muscular palms, but he still powered through and landed the kick on his face. This made Ken smile, and everyone was shocked that the Madara Uchiha of their verse had cracked a smile for the first time. Following this, both Omnichads went bar for bar, exchanging haymakers with each other, and the feud between them continued for a while, but a winner was never determined. In the present, Auda realizes that Ken has been waiting for the day that Marito will finally defeat him, but it doesn't look that way at all on the battlefield as Ken rocks Marito's face with a brutal blow. Marito responds with a kick to the chest, and as their brawl continues, Mahoro tries to stop her brother, but Arajin sneaks in and tells her that it's too dangerous, so she sends him to go stop them. As Arajin sneaks in to stop them, the impact of their blows sends some debris flying in his direction, which scares him away. The two powerhouses charge in with their most powerful attacks, and once they clash, the impact destroys the ground beneath them, causing them to fall to the ground below. Mahoro immediately rushes in to check on her unconscious brother, and Arajin tries to help, but Mahoro shatters his heart into a million pieces by telling him she's done with him. Just then, Shindo gives the Nitro Boys the order to pick up the scraps, so they charge in with their metal bats, and the Minato Kai boys rush in to face them. This makes Senya happy because the chaos could be a window for him and Ichiya to finally merge, but Arajin walks away and tells him that none of it matters anymore, since he's lost the girl. However, Senya shows him that his friends are still fighting for their lives, and asks him if he plans to abandon them. But the living trash pile says they aren't his friends and runs away. Suddenly, Shindo blocks his path and starts pummeling Arajin while telling him he'd die if he doesn't merge with Senya. As he stomps on Arajin, Senya begs him to merge and save his life, but Arajin says there's no point in living anymore. After knocking Arajin out, Shindo proudly announces to everyone that he was the mastermind, and Saki jumps in for an attack, but gets smacked to the ground by Shindo's whip. Seeing this, Zabu rushes in and attempts an Ora punch rush, but Shindo dodges and knocks his lights out before inviting all the other Minato Kai members to face him at once. Ryu avoids his whip strikes while charging forward and tries to land his famous headbutt from hell, but Shindo knocks him out with a powerful knee strike and proceeds to dismantle every other Minato Kai member that approaches him. Eventually, the golden boy, Madakara, steps up to face him, and he manages to land a kick, but Shindo readjusts his broken neck like a horror villain and starts whipping him brutally like a black parent. After knocking Madakara out, Shindo makes plans to destroy their bodies so they'd never fight again, but suddenly, Mahoro steps up to him and tells him to disappear. Without hesitation, Shindo whips her to the ground, and Arajin begs her to run away, but she gets back up and calls Shindo a pathetic scumbag instead, so he tries to unalive her with an axe kick. However, Arajin finally grows some marbles and stops his attack, and as Shindo whips him, Arajin endures all the pain while marching ahead. As Arajin and Shindo trade blows, the Minato Kai members start cheering Arajin on, and with the power of friendship, Arajin lands his most powerful punch yet, sending Shindo flying several miles north of Texas. Seeing that Shindo is defeated, everyone starts celebrating Arajin like he's just won the World Cup, and Madakara tells Arajin that he never stopped believing in him. So Arajin helps his injured friend home. The next day, Arajin walks cheerfully through the hallway, and Senya glazes him, claiming he's become powerful enough to challenge Goku, and he gloats about how he'll capture Mahoro's heart with his strength. However, when he enters class, he notices that Mahoro isn't around, and Saki surprises him with painful shoulder chops while praising his punch. Just then, Madakara arrives and asks to speak with Arajin, but Arajin says he needs to find Mahoro, so Madakara informs him that she's been at the hospital watching over Marieto. Hearing this, Simp uses the flash step technique to dodge him and rush away to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, Madakara informs Arajin that his brother, Mitsukuni, was sent to juvie after beating up a cop who forced his friends to sell drugs, and the last thing he told Madakara was to keep working hard to become a honky person. Madakara claims that it's these words that have been driving him all this time, and reveals that his brother is coming back next week, which makes Arajin happy. In the hospital, Mahoro tries to feed Marito the special grade curse she cooked up instead of food, but he stops her hand to save his bowels. Once Arajin arrives, he tries to rizz up Mahoro, but she gives him a bombastic side-eye because he's once again ruined her chance of getting to taste Oni-chan's juicy eggplant. As Arajin plays around with Marito, Mahoro asks him to leave, claiming his loser pheromones are contaminating the air, but Marito gives her the shock of her life by telling her to leave instead, so she runs away in agony. Arajin chases after her, but she corners him by the wall and tells him that he's still a worthless idiot, even though he defeated Shindo. However, after she leaves, the insufferable simp starts geeking out about how his Barbie just wall-slammed him. When he returns to the hospital room, Marito brings up his triumph against Shindo, and Arajin seizes the opportunity to ask him for permission to crack his sister, but Marito cuts him off by asking to go on a group date, which Arajin cheerfully agrees to. Later, at the Siguma hideout, Arajin is bummed out by the fact that Madakara is coming for the group date, and when he asks Tatsudo why they invited Minato Kai, he coldly responds that they can't do the task by themselves. Tatsudo then tells Arajin that they're going to the beach, and Arajin's brain starts overheating as he imagines Mahoro wearing a tantalizing swimsuit. Meanwhile, Saki is cheerfully glazing Arajin's punch, and Madakara admits that it's just like a honky person's, but Zabu says he isn't in the mood since he couldn't do anything, and he feels that he owes Arajin something for saving them. However, Madakara cheers him up by reminding Zabu that he saved him. Later that night, Arajin is lying on the bed, and he tells Zabu that he feels more like a man. This makes Senya happy because he thinks Arajin is finally becoming more powerful, but the idiot starts geeking out about his bedroom plans with Mahoro, leaving Senya disappointed. The next day, Arajin arrives at the beach, fully ready to have fun in the water, but he notices that everyone isn't outside and there's a tent nearby. As he enters the tent, the lights come on, and he sees a poster on the wall which says they're having a group combat date. The entire tent has been set up like an episode of SmackDown, and Tatsudo pops out in a referee costume to announce the start of the combat date between Minato Kai and Siguma. For the first match, Aota shows up in wrestling tights to represent Siguma, and Ken arrives, cosplaying Randy Orton, to face him. As the two muscleheads brawl, Ken places Aota in a headlock, but Aota counters by nailing Ken with a backdrop. However, Ken gets back up immediately and launches Aota to the ropes with a clothesline, and everything starts glazing him, thinking he's won. But suddenly, they notice that he's in suspended animation. Upon taking a closer look at him, Tatsudo announces that Ken has thrown out his back and gives Aota the victory, but Aota immediately passes out. As they stretcher the failed wrestlers away, Zabu promises Arajin that he'll go hard in his match to repay him, and Arajin doesn't understand what he means until he sees the fight banner on the wall, which has his name on it. Desperate for motivation, Arajin sneaks out of the tent to take a peek at Mahoro's goods through her swimsuit, only to see her dressed like a full black Dubai outfit, which makes him depressed. In the tent, Saki uses an armbreaker submission to finish off his opponent, but just as he starts celebrating, Marito shows up as his next opponent and sends him flying away from the ring to claim the victory. While seated at ringside, Mahoro says she's hungry, so the desperate simp offers to go buy her some food. Outside, Shindo is in the canteen, making food while whining about how they're using him as a yakisoba machine, but Ichiya tells him to put up with it. Just then, Arajin shows up too, with some food, and he asks him where he heard the name Senya from, but Shindo tells him to ask Senya himself while handing him the food, so Senya drags him away. Back inside the tent, Madakara defeats his opponent easily, and Tatsudo announces that he's taken out 7 people so far. Seeing this, Saki tells Zabu it's his turn to show his strength, and Zabu passionately declares that he'll win, only to be sent flying out of the tent seconds later. Shortly afterwards, Marito destroys all opponents sent after him, and all the Siguma members are so terrified of his strength. Eventually, it comes down to Madakara and Marito, but Marito flips the script by proposing a tag match between himself and Ryu against Madakara and Arajin. Arajin immediately tries to refuse, but Madakara agrees on his behalf, and Arajin starts freaking out, so Matakara motivates him by telling him to do his best. After the introductions, the match officially begins, and Matakara starts exchanging haymakers with Ryu, so Arajin tells Matakara to finish him off so that he won't get to fight. However, Mahoro starts cheering them on, so Arajin tags in to impress her, but Marito forces Ryu to tag him in, so Arajin fakes a leg injury to force Matakara back in. Within minutes, Marito overpowers Matakara and pins him, but Matakara breaks the pin and tries to kick him, but Marito counters and locks him in a deadly submission. Seeing this, everyone begs Matakara to give up so he won't die, but Matakara breaks his own arm to escape and manages to land a kick, which makes Marito bleed from the nose. As Marito charges in to finish him off, Arajin distracts him by lying that Sydney Sweeney's cracking video has leaked, so Marito drags him in and starts pummeling him. Matakara tries to save him, but Ryu attacks him, so he destroys Ryu with a suplex and delivers a kick. However, Marito gets back up and throws Arajin away, and Arajin lands right on top of Ryu, so the referee counts to 3 and gives Arajin the victory. Several years ago, Chibi Matakara asked his brother what some paintings on the wall meant, and Mitsukuni said, "It means that a honky person is one who finds a head and never flees." He then asks Mitsukuni if honky meant a strong fighter, but Mitsukuni said it didn't just mean strong, but also pure of heart. However, Matakara started to notice some shadows moving on the paintings, which scared him, and when he asked Mitsukuni what they were, he said they were things that creep into the hearts of weak people. Mitsukuni then bent down and told him that being a honky person meant never running away, and these words motivated Matakara. Back in the present, Matakara smiles at a photo of himself and Mitsukuni from that day and bids it farewell as he heads to school. Later on, Mahoro is drooling over photos of Marito on the roof when Arajin arrives, and he tries to ask her out on a date, but she coldly walks away. Just then, Matakara arrives and offers to have lunch with Arajin. As they eat together, Matakara asks Arajin to let him throw his brother's welcoming party at his family restaurant because Mitsukuni said he wanted to stuff his face with good food when he gets released, and he loves the gyoza at their place. Hours later, Matakara is with his buddies, and Saki is celebrating the fact that they're throwing a party, but Zabu doesn't understand why they have to do it at Arajin's place, so Matakara explains that his brother loves their food more than Wingstop meals. When Matakara asks if they'll come, they both cheerfully agree, so he heads off to ask Ken, who also agrees to attend the welcoming party. Meanwhile, Arajin is walking through the street, and Senya starts geeking out because he feels Matakara's brother will be as powerful as Gear 5 Luffy, and Arajin confirms that he's stronger than Ken, which makes Senya so happy that he asks to merge. When Arajin asks why he wants to merge so badly, Senya says it's because he wants to build a happy family with him, but Arajin instantly rejects this rainbow-flagged idea. Elsewhere, Matakara sees some Nitro boys beating up Shindo, so he asks them to stop and challenge him one by one, but one of them refuses and brings up how cruel he was to them while whipping him even more. However, Matakara grabs his hands and threatens to shove his king-sized eggplant down his throat if he doesn't stop, so the bullies finally retreat. After confirming that Shindo is okay, he turns to leave, but Shindo suddenly grovels while apologizing for his actions, and he claims that Arajin helped him realize his own power. However, Shindo says he knows the secret behind Arajin's strength and whispers into Matakara's ear that the temple has a secret before telling him not to worry about it and walking away. At the train station, Shindo asks Ichiya if he did enough, and Ichiya confirms that he did, but points out that they're the same because they're both seeking revenge. Later that evening, Matakara and Arajin are making some decorations at the restaurant. Shortly afterwards, Arajin and Matakara are making gyoza in the kitchen together, but Matakara keeps flopping and tells Arajin that his brother used to make terrible gyoza as well when they were younger. When Arajin asks if they'll live together, Matakara reveals his plans to rent an apartment together once he saves up money, and he invites Arajin to come over when that happens, but Arajin claims he'll be too busy with Mahoro. Finally, the day of Mitsukuni's release arrives, and Matakara carries 2 umbrellas and heads to pick him up, while Arajin and all the Minato-Kei members set up the decorations in preparation for Mitsukuni's return. As Matakara waits outside the juvie building, he sees a man running towards him, so he smiles, thinking it's Mitsukuni, but it turns out to be one of the officials, who turns his smile upside down by delivering some horrible news about Mitsukuni. The next day, Zabu goes to Matakara's place to look for him, but the lady says he hasn't come home since the previous day, and he isn't answering his phone because of something that happened to his brother, so Zabu asks Saki to join him in finding Matakara. Later, at school, Arajin tries to start a conversation with Mahoro, but Zabu and Saki interrupt and drag him away to have a private conversation with him. In the stairway, they explain to Arajin that Mitsukuni was stabbed while trying to break up a fight in juvie, and the doctors believe that he isn't going to make it. Saki then brings up the fact that Matakara is currently missing and asks Arajin if he has any idea where he'd have gone, but Arajin claims that he has no idea. So Zabu angrily asks him why he doesn't care about his buddy. However, the worthless imp replies that Matakara isn't his buddy, so Zabu angrily walks away with Saki, and Senya tells Arajin that Matakara is going through hell because of what happened with his brother. Later that evening, Matakara is drowning in misery at a bench when a strange shadow suddenly appears and starts chasing him. He runs into an empty street to escape, but just when he gets exhausted, the shadow corners him. Hours later, Matakara arrives at Arajin's home, where he sees Arajin sleeping, but he sees the metal pin on Arajin's head, which makes him remember the warnings from Zabu and Shindo that Arajin has a secret. When he touches it, Senya appears in his full glory, and Matakara thinks he's a reincarnation of Sukuna, so he screams and runs away as fast as he can. He soon arrives at a street where Shindo approaches him and tells him that Arajin's strength is fake because he's being boosted by the spirit possessing him. Matakara argues that it's a lie, and Shindo bluntly states that Arajin has been deceiving him this whole time, but Matakara still doesn't want to believe it, so he runs away, causing Shindo to do a light Yagami evil laugh. Minutes later, Arajin meets Arajin at the shrine and asks him why he visited, but he changed the subject by asking if his strength truly comes from the monster living inside him. Arajin then brings up the bullying incident from their past, and Matakara claims that Arajin stopped talking to him afterwards because he was too weak, but Arajin explained that he actually abandoned him and ran away. Matakara still argues that he's not the type of person to do that, so Arajin passionately tells him to stop pretending that he's strong because he's never been strong in the first place. He then confesses that it's Senya's power he used during those fights, and Matakara reminds him of their promise to be honky people, but he says he doesn't want to be a honky person anymore. Shortly afterwards, Matakara is in the shrine, cowering in fear over the shadow, but Shindo suddenly arrives and guides him in firing the spirit gun, which releases a bullet that pierces his heart. When Matakara wakes up, he sees a metal piece in his chest, and once he touches it, Ichiya appears in front of him. As Matakara lies unconscious on the ground, Shido crashes out at Ichiya, asking why he tricked him and transferred to Matakara, so Ichiya explains that he simply chose the stronger host and also points out that Matakara carries a darkness of immeasurable depth within him. However, Shindo still keeps yelling at him, so he tells Shindo to be grateful that he got out of it with his body still intact. When Shindo asks what he means, he says it's no longer any of his business, and Shindo tries to transfer Ichiya back inside him using the gun, but it doesn't work. And Ichiya bluntly tells him that he has no use for a weak vessel before jumping into Matakara's body. The next morning, Arajin asks Mahoro out on a date the next day, but she rejects him, so he shifts his attention to Zabu and Saki, who are talking about how Matakara still hasn't come home. Meanwhile, Shindo returns to the Nitro Boys headquarters, only to see that his subordinates are now living freely and planning to stick cactuses up his dumpster hole if he ever comes back, so he runs away from there. At the restaurant, Arajin is cooking up a meal, and Senya tells him that he didn't have to say all that to Matakara, but Arajin argues that it's a relief to get everything off his chest. Meanwhile, Zabu and Saki arrive in Matakara's room, where they see him gathering his life savings, and they try to talk to him, but he ignores them and walks away. So Zabu tells him to come to school the next day. A while later, Arajin is walking by the street, complaining about how his bath suddenly got busted, and he tells Senya that he's going to Matakara's place since it's the only public bath nearby. He suddenly bumps into Matakara and tells him that he's going to his place because his bath is broken, but Matakara weirdly runs away. Meanwhile, Shindo is having a full crash-out session at the shrine, saying he won't forgive Ichiya for dumping him, and he finds a piece of paper inside a box, which has the word honky written on it. As Arajin prepares for his bath, Saki suddenly arrives and sees Senya's hand mark on his back, so he offers to wash it away. After the wash, Arajin is chilling in the bath when Zabu appears and asks him if Matakara said anything to him. Arajin says he didn't and suggests that they leave him alone, but Zabu claims that it would be a horrible decision given his current state, so Saki cheers them both up by giving them an exclusive experience with his sausage roll. Later that day, Mahoro is playing with a doll replica of her brother, but once she hears Marito approaching, she jumps and hides under her sheets. Marito enters the room with Aota, who tells him about what happened to Mitsukuni, and this makes Marito angry because he thought the former Minato Kai leader would be stronger. Aota says Madakara must be suffering at the moment, and when Marito asks why he's bringing him up, he reveals he's Mitsukuni's younger brother, causing Naruto and Mahoro to freak out. Later that evening, Madakara touches the metal plate on his chest to summon Ichiya, but he's still terrified of the dark entity in the room, so Ichiya explains that it represents the darkness in his heart and offers to free him from it. Ichiya claims that the darkness will disappear forever when he achieves true power, but Madakara says it's a lie because he tried to make himself stronger after Arajin left him, but the monster still kept following him. However, Ichiya says he gave up instead of defeating everyone to rise to the top, and Madakara brings up how his friends accepted him, but Ichiya claims that friends are worthless for people training to be honky people. Madakara trembles in fear of the dark entity again, so Ichiya explains that as long as he keeps depending on Arajin, he'll never become a honky person and the darkness will never disappear, and asks him to defeat Arajin. The next day, Arajin is in class, feeling sad while holding the best friend stone he got from Madakara, which makes him remember their fun times together, but Mahoro suddenly calls his name, causing him to leap in joy. He meets her on the roof, where she brings up how Madakara has been ill since his brother's death and claims that she understands how he feels because the same thing has happened to her before. Hearing this, Arajin starts freaking out because he thinks Madakara has been feeding her his white sauce in secret, and he tries to change the subject, but she suddenly asks him if he's ever considered Madakara's feelings. This leaves Arajin speechless, and this gives her the confirmation she needs that he's a selfish jerk, so she walks away and tells him not to talk to her again until he does. While walking home that day, Arajin is playing around with Senya when Shindo suddenly arrives, looking like a homeless Sith Lord, and he places the honky paper in Arajin's pocket before leaving. In the temple, Ichiya tells Madakara that he'll be reborn and freed from the monster's grasp if he defeats Arajin, but Madakara argues that he can't do something like that, so Ichiya gaslights him by reminding him that Arajin has been deceiving him all this time. This makes Madakara depressed, so Ichiya offers the olive branch once again by offering to turn him into a honky person and releasing him from the monster if he defeats Arajin, and Madakara starts to fold. After the same time, Senya tells Arajin about how he met Ichiya and trained with him to become honky people until their friendship eventually shattered. Senya tells Arajin that he likes the determination he sees in him, and claims that Madakara chose to become a honky person because of it as well. Suddenly, Madakara arrives and starts attacking him, so Senya asks to merge with him. Once Arajin merges with Senya, he's able to block Madakara's attacks, but Ichiya gives Madakara a fraction of his power, which allows him to kick Arajin to the ground, causing Senya to fly out of his body. As Madakara moves in to make the finishing blow, Arajin's bowels start freaking out again, but Madakara stops at the last second, so he runs to the nearest bathroom. Later that evening, Senya tells Arajin that Ichiya has possessed Madakara, but when Arajin asks who Ichiya is, he suddenly vanishes. Arajin later meets up with Shindo, who reveals that Senya's goal is to take over his body. At the shrine, Ichiya starts rage-baiting Madakara by calling Mitsukuni a fraud, and Madakara argues, saying his brother was as strong as a honky person, but Ichiya laughs and says he was nothing but a weak pretender. This gets Madakara so enraged that he forces Ichiya into his body and destroys the shadow monster with a kick, so Ichiya tells him to annihilate Arajin for deceiving him. Meanwhile, Arajin is confused by what Shindo revealed about Senya, so Shindo explains that Arajin had been deceived because he would die if Senya took over his body. Arajin doesn't believe him, so he tells Arajin to ask Senya himself and tell Madakara about this discovery before he runs out of time. The next day, Arajin arrives at school, and once he sees Mahoro, he remembers her telling him not to talk to her until he's considered Madakara's feelings. While walking through the hallway, he sees Zabu and Saki searching Madakara's class, and they don't see Madakara in class, so they start making plans to go search Disneyland for a new bestie. However, Madakara suddenly arrives and asks them to go have fun with him, so Saki cheerfully grabs his shoulder as they move ahead. As Arajin watches them, he calls Senya to come out so they can talk, but Senya doesn't show up, so he wonders what Senya is doing. Meanwhile, Zabu and Saki are playing video games at the arcade while Matakara watches them, and Matakara decides to go get some drinks, but on the way there, he bumps into some Nitro boys patrolling the area. Seeing that he's Minato Kai's number 2, the Nitro boys decide to leave, but Matakara suddenly pulls one of them back and takes him out with a diabolical gut punch for bumping into him. The other Nitro boys surround him to get revenge, but Matakara brutally slimes them off screen, and his friends hear the noise, so they rush over to see what's going on. When they see the unconscious losers lying around, Zabu asks Matakara what's going on because he didn't used to bother about Nitro boys, but Matakara doesn't give him an answer before walking off. As Matakara walks through the street, Ichiya admits that he did a great job with the Nitro boys, but says he has to aim a bit higher next time, so Matakara decides to target the Siguma squad members approaching them. Ryu steps up to challenge him, but Matakara tells him that he isn't the target that day and jumps in to kick Marieto, but Marieto blocks and invites him to try harder. As Matakara spams attacks at him, Marieto blocks and launches his signature power kick, but he's shocked to see that Matakara blocked it. Matakara then attempts several more kicks, but Marieto parkours around him to evade them and drop kicks him right into the ground. He tries to get back up, but Ichiya tells him to withdraw for now, because he isn't ready to fight Marieto yet, so he runs away. Ryu tries to chase after him, but Marieto stops him and tells him that Matakara is his prey. Meanwhile, Arajin is in his room, begging Senya to come out, but his mom suddenly arrives and starts geeking out about the telenovela brainrot she watched that day, so Arajin throws her out and continues asking Senya questions about what Shindo told him. Later that evening, Matakara returns to the shrine and asks Ichiya why he stopped him, so Ichiya explains that he would have lost, and losing now would make the shadow demon haunt him forever. When the shadow monster appears, Matakara is frozen in fear, but he goes outside to do some solo leveling by destroying random hoodlums on the street. The next day, Zabu tells Ken that Matakara hasn't been acting like himself recently because he's been picking fights with Siguma gangsters and the Nitro boys, so Ken sends him to bring Matakara to him. Meanwhile, Matakara sees Tatsudo while walking by the street, and Ichiya asks why he isn't fighting him, so he explains that he's looking for someone stronger. However, the Gaslighting King says he needs to fight Tatsudo to erase the dark monster, so he walks over to him. Even while trembling in fear, Tatsudo charges at him angrily, hoping to get revenge for his friends that Matakara beat up, but his blow does 0 damage to Matakara, and Matakara sends him flying with a kick. As he walks away, Tatsudo gets back up, and Ichiya tells him to go beat him up some more, but Matakara argues that it's enough. However, Ichiya says he needs to abandon his cowardly heart and be more ruthless, so he goes back to continue this one-sided fight. A while later, Matakara stares at Tatsudo's unconscious body, but Ryu suddenly arrives, boiling in anger as he charges at Matakara with a punch. Matakara dodges, so he swears that he'll unalive Matakara, and the two of them start brawling. Ryu manages to deliver his signature headbutt, which pushes Matakara back, but Ichiya tells Matakara that the monster would keep haunting him if he loses, so he charges in and launches Ryu with a powerful kick. As Ryu tries to get back up, he piles on the offense with more brutal kicks, and Tatsudo sees this, so he tries to protect Ryu with his body, but Matakara kicks him away. The next day in school, the students are talking about how Matakara brutally beat the Sigma boys, and Arajin is surprised that he'd go that far. Later that day, Marieto visits an injured Ryu and scolds him for facing his prey before handing him some food. After leaving the room, Aoda tells Marieto not to fight Matakara because he has a bad feeling about things, but Marieto refuses because he wants some excitement. Meanwhile, Zabu and Saki run into Matakara while he's pummeling some street trash, and they try to talk some sense into him, but he says he's trying to get stronger. Zabu informs him that Ken wants to see him, but Matakara says he's saving him for last, leaving them confused. Suddenly, Marieto takes over the school radio and calls Matakara to the school field to have a rematch with him, so all the gangsters rush away to watch this showdown. The teacher tries to continue his lecture with just Arajin in class, but Arajin remembers Shindo's warning from earlier, so he rushes away to find Matakara. When Arajin arrives at the field, he sees Matakara launching some kicks at Marieto, but Marieto blocks and delivers a brutal drop kick. However, Matakara blocks his kick and every other attack that follows, but when he tries to finish off Marieto, the Gigachad sidesteps and sends him flying to the ground with a roundhouse kick. When Matakara charges in again, Marieto brutally knocks him around, so he throws some sand in his face as a distraction and moves in for a sneak attack. However, Marieto still nails him with another powerful kick and starts treating his body like a piñata, but Madakara pulls an Asta by getting back up, and he triggers the merging process with Ichiya by saying he wishes for power. In this possessed state, he sends Marieto flying into the fence with an ultra-powerful kick and proceeds to beat the stuffing out of him while Mahoro cries helplessly. He then lands the finishing blow, causing Mahoro to pass out, and everyone in the crowd is completely frozen in shock, as their undefeated king has been bodied. Later that evening, Arajin aggressively calls Senya to come out so that he can find out what's going on with Madakara, and Senya finally appears. Several years ago, in a time when people training to be honky people were shot down by the authorities, Senya and Ichiya were training together, and Senya unleashed a Muda Muda punch rush on Ichiya, but Ichiya blocked and nailed him with a kick, which sent him flying into a tree. Senya admitted that he was no match for Ichiya, but Ichiya claimed Senya was mocking him and walked away angrily. Sometime later, Ichiya challenged Senya to a serious battle, and Senya didn't want to participate because one of them could end up dead, but Ichiya took a stance while telling him that he's been waiting for it for so long and nothing else remained for him. Senya asked him to explain himself, but Ichiya said it's a waste of breath and delivered a powerful kick, which split Senya's chest right open. After brawling for several hours, they reached a stalemate and charged at each other once again, but Ichiya kicked Senya to the ground and told him to get back up because he felt that Senya was still mocking him. Suddenly, he received a fatal backshot from a soldier, but as he struggled with the pain on the ground, he swore to Senya that he'd keep the grudge. Senya tried to check on him but ended up getting railed from behind as well, so he died right next to Ichiya. In the present, Senya tells Arajin this story and explains that he has to settle things with Ichiya to understand why he risked his life. Arajin asks if he intends to trick him and unalive him to do that, but Senya says he intends to return his body afterwards. However, Arajin says he no longer wants to hear his excuses and commands him to get out of his body, so Senya says goodbye and vanishes. Later that evening, Madakara is beating up a thug, and the thug begs for his life, but the nonchalant Karate King knocks his lights out with several more kicks. Afterwards, he walks to a street where he meets Arajin, who explains to him that Ichiya intends to take over his body, and asks him to force him out, but Madakara feels that Arajin doesn't care about him, so he concludes that Arajin doesn't like the idea of him getting stronger. To convince him further, Arajin says he'll die if his body is completely taken over, but Madakara says it's fine so long as he beats him and coldly walks away, leaving Arajin confused as to what to do next. Ichiya tries to convince him to fight Arajin, but Madakara tells him to shut up because there's something he has to do first. A while later, 3 members of the Siguma squad ask Auta what happens to them now that their boss was publicly slimed, but Auta punches the ground in anger while responding that Siguma isn't done yet. The next morning, at the Minato Kai base, 2 members are talking about how Madakara is acting more violently than his usual self, but suddenly, the devil they speak of arrives and packs them up in seconds. Seeing this, Zabu asks Madakara what he's doing, and Madakara says he wants to fight Ken one-on-one, but Zabu feels that he's officially gone mad. Saki approaches Madakara to talk some sense into him, but he shoves him into the ground, so Zabu grabs his shirt while asking what his problem is. However, Ken suddenly arrives, so Madakara tells him to meet him at a spot called Ichizube at an agreed time before walking off. Hours later, Arajin is cooking up a storm in the kitchen when 2 bozos start talking about the upcoming match between Madakara and Ken, which makes him remember Madakara's words from earlier. Suddenly, Ken arrives at the diner, so Arajin meets him outside and asks why he wants to talk to him. Meanwhile, Mahoro is watching over her unconscious brother in the hospital when Auta arrives and asks to take over from her, claiming she needs a break, but she refuses, so he walks away, leaving her in tears. The next day, Zabu and Saki are seated on a bench, and Zabu remembers the day they joined the Minato Kai gang. That day, they were both in high spirits because they deeply admired Ken for his 300-fight winning streak, but they saw Madakara beat up some members before asking to duel Ken. When the duel began, Madakara charged in with a kick, but Ken blocked before knocking him down with a brutal palm strike. Hours later, Zabu and Saki handed Madakara a drink and started glazing him for his courage, so he thanked them. In the present, Zabu asks Arajin to go get Arajin before the fight starts because he's Madakara's friend, and Saki cheerfully rushes away to do that. At the hospital, Auta tells Ryu and Tatsudo that Marieto still hasn't woken up after 3 days in a coma, and this makes Ryu so angry that he walks away to avenge Marieto, but Tatsudo smacks him in the face and cries while calling him a dummy for ignoring how hurt he is himself. Aota calms both of them down and tells them that it's their responsibility to protect Siguma until the boss comes back, so they nod in agreement. That evening, Matakara is heading to the duel spot when Zabu appears in front of him and spams some punches in an attempt to stop him. But he tanks every single blow and knocks Zabu down with a knee strike before axe-kicking him hard on the ground. While struggling to get back up, Zabu begs Matakara to go back to being his friend, but Matakara delivers another brutal kick before knocking him down again with a back heel. As Matakara tries to move ahead, Zabu holds his leg and tells him that he's his friend, so Matakara kicks him repeatedly until he lets go. Minutes later, Matakara arrives at the duel spot, where he declares that he'll beat Ken and grow stronger. When the duel begins, Temu Bruce Lee spams kicks at Ken, but Ken blocks his attacks before sending him flying with a palm strike. As he struggles on the ground, Ken punches him into the air and tries to land his finishing blow, but Matakara merges with Ichiya and counters with a super-powered roundhouse kick. He then overwhelms Ken with a flurry of powerful kicks, but Ken still stands, so he delivers several more brutal attacks. However, at that moment, Ken remembers the day Mitsukuni asked him to protect Minato Kai if anything happened to him, so he remains standing, despite being knocked out. Seeing this, Arajin remembers Ken asking him to stop Matakara with his fists if he gets defeated, so Arajin goes back into the shrine and shoots his head again to summon Senya. Once Senya appears, Arajin asks Senya to merge with him. Senya reminds Arajin that he could die if they merge all the way, but Arajin asks him to shut up and claims he won't die because he's doing it to wake Matakara up. Meanwhile, Arajin's mom just finished watching the latest episode of Euphoria, and she heads into Arajin's room to look for him, but she doesn't see him there, so she suspects that he's secretly cracking goth girls. At the Siguma base, Aota wonders if Matakara has been possessed by the spirit of Muhammad Ali, and Tatsudo points out that Arajin isn't among them. But Ryu says it doesn't matter because he's useless even when he's there. However, once Aota hears Arajin's name, he tells them that Arajin could know something about it. Meanwhile, the skies start turning red, and Ichiya completely takes control of Matakara's body, so he declares that it's time for his final confrontation with Senya. At the same time, Saki wraps up Zabu in bandages, but Zabu struggles back to his feet and tells Saki that they have to find Arajin. At the hospital, Mahoro hands Marieto his favorite McDonald's treat, but he still doesn't wake up, and she gets so depressed that she heads outside to cool off. Just then, the nurse brings in Ken's unconscious body, and immediately she mentions his name. Marieto finally wakes up and says it as well. As the nurses place Ken's body in a strange bondage position, Marieto freaks out, so Mahoro and the others celebrate his awakening. Meanwhile, Aota, Zabu, and Saki arrive at the restaurant to look for Arajin, and their mom says he isn't around, so they try to run away to find him, but she starts spouting some random nonsense about how they need to let him evolve into a man, which makes them hesitate. At the same time, Arajin is walking out of the temple when Matakara arrives, and Senya tells Arajin that Ichiya has fully taken over his body, so he steps up to face him. Arajin asks Senya to merge with him, and when Senya asks for his wish, he ditches the virginity nonsense and wishes for Matakara to wake up, so Senya possesses him. However, Arajin's consciousness suddenly falls into the abyss, so Senya crashes out, calling Arajin an idiot for letting him take over. Ichiya tells Ichiya he's waited 300 years for this duel, and Senya asks him why he risked his life to duel him, but Ichiya says he'll find his answer by fighting him, so they take their battle stances. Once the fight begins, Ichiya delivers a barrage of kicks to Senya, but Senya grabs his leg, so he spins out of Senya's grasp and delivers a swift kick before landing on the ground. Senya goes full star platinum by unleashing a flurry of super fast punches, but Ichiya blocks and brings him down with a powerful kick. When Senya tries to attack again, Ichiya trips him and smashes him into the ground with an axe kick before asking him to get back up. After forcing his leg away, Senya makes it back to his feet, but Ichiya doesn't even give him a second to breathe before launching another wave of powerful kicks directly at his face. Senya realizes he can't win, but he remembers that Ichiya was the one who inspired him to become a honky person, and he always wanted to be as strong as him, so he feels it's impossible to beat him. Ichiya knocks Senya to the ground and explains that the reason he risked his life for the duel was that he wanted to die by Senya's hand rather than the STD that was already destroying him. As he moves in to land the finishing blow, Senya apologizes to him for not being able to give him what he wanted and passes out. However, the sound of Arajin's voice wakes him up in a mental world where Arajin headbutts him while asking what he's doing. Senya says he can't beat Ichiya, so Arajin tells him not to give up and start fighting for real, but Senya tells him to shut up, so he slaps Senya's back while telling him to stop running away. This gives him the motivation he needs to stop Ichiya's kick with a guy punch and get back to his feet. Seeing that he's finally fighting seriously, Senya cheerfully charges in, and the two clash intensely, causing lightning bolts to spark all over the area. Meanwhile, Zabu and Saki are searching for Arajin, and they spot him fighting with Madakara, so they rush over to help him. As the battle rages on, Senya charges in with a punch, but Senya dishes and remembers how he could never forgive Senya for holding back during their match, and how he also couldn't forgive himself for failing to make Senya a honky person. The two Super Saiyans cheerfully trade blows once again until Senya eventually knocks Ichiya to the ground, and Senya tries to help Ichiya back up, but his body is suddenly taken over by a dark version of Madakara, who declares that he'll defeat Arajin. In a split second, Dark Madakara charges in and knocks Senya out with a brutal kick, and he tries to finish him off with an axe kick, but Arajin taps into his Gunner force, which allows him to take control of his body again and block the kick. Arajin is confused by Madakara's current form, so Senya explains that he amplified his power by absorbing Ichiya. Suddenly, Madakara pushes him back with a powerful kick and overwhelms him with several more kicks, and Senya begs Arajin to save himself by staying down, but Arajin gets back up and asks Madakara why he needs to get strong. Madakara pummels him while replying that he needs to become the strongest to drive away the monster, but Arajin tackles him to the ground while telling him he's become the monster himself. However, Madakara gets back up and unleashes a flurry of attacks while saying that he never needed any friends, and this makes Arajin realize that Madakara has been scared of loneliness all this time, so he decides that he won't run away anymore. Madakara delivers a kick to end the battle, but Arajin takes it head-on and throws a punch powered up by the light of their friendship stone, which saves Madakara from the darkness in his soul. As the smoke clears, Senya realizes that Arajin has become a true honky person, so he thanks Arajin for teaching him what honky really means before leaving. When Madakara wakes up, he starts crying in remorse, but Arajin tells him he's not alone, and as the Minato Kai members rush in, he stamps the friendship stone on his palm. The next day, Madakara apologizes to everyone in the Minato Kai for his actions, and they welcome him back with open arms. Days later, Madakara is holding Mitsukuni's hand in the hospital, but his fingers suddenly twitch, which makes Madakara happy. Meanwhile, Arajin is missing Senya, so he goes to the beach and throws Senya's metal piece into the river, but it ricochets off some items back into his head, and Senya appears once again. That's it for this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and watch this video on screen.